The night in Makochi was deep and damp, but it's exactly this kind of night that sometimes gives birth to stories people later tell in whispers. The streetlights flickered, as if trying to warn. Something important will happen here tonight. Cold fog crept low, embracing the old buildings, and the city seemed alive, on edge. Umemiya Hajime walked slowly, hands in his pockets, thinking about his own things, about furin, about exhaustion, about the fact that in this city he had never found anything that could truly touch him, until he heard shouting, not panicked, angry, rough, the shouts of those who were used to taking by force. 5 thugs, and 1 girl, pressed between a wall and their shadows. One of them placed his hand above her head, leaning in so close, as if he had already won. The air in the alley grew heavy and dangerous, but the girl didn't look scared. On the contrary, she stood so calmly, as if she had been the one to drive them into a trap. A leather jacket, carelessly buttoned, hands in her pockets, black hair pulled into a messy ponytail, eyes dark, cold, dangerous. She looked at the attacker as if she were about to bite through his throat. The thug didn't get to finish his sentence. Her strike between his legs was so sharp that even Umemiya felt a phantom pain. The thug doubled over, and she grabbed his head and kneed him so hard he went unconscious instantly. The second thug met the wall face first and was also out of the fight. The 3 who remained froze. One pulled out a knife. The girl tilted her head slightly and smiled as if all of this was entertaining her. Umemiya understood 2 things at once. First, this stranger didn't need his help. Second, he had never in his life seen anyone so dangerous and so beautiful. Something in his chest clenched, sharply warm, alive, inexplicable. Umemiya stepped out of the shadows calmly, but in a way that made the 3 thugs immediately go pale. One look was enough. They grabbed their companions and, stumbling, disappeared into the darkness, shouting his name. "You're strong." Umemiya smiled warmly, trying not to look too impressed. "I know," she said indifferently, not even bothering to brush aside the strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. He spoke gently, almost carefully with her. It was better not to take chances. The girl raised her eyes to him, brief, sharp, like a blade, assessed, drew conclusions. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you. Glad to help. I'm Umemiya Hajime. I'd like to know need." She walked past him as if he were part of the scenery. Near the alley exit stood a motorcycle, dark, heavy, with scratches that looked like battle scars. It suited her just as much as this night did. The stranger put on her helmet, sat down, started the engine. The roar of the motor cut through the silence like a challenge. "Hey." Umemiya stepped forward. "What's your name?" She turned her head for just 1 second, but that was enough for him to remember her gaze. "Kimi." And she drove away. Umemiya stood for a long time, staring into the emptiness of the alley where her shadow had just disappeared. Something stirred strangely in his chest, not fear, not adrenaline, something else, warmer, dangerous, independent, incredible. "She's so beautiful," he whispered, smiling to himself. Kimi raced forward without looking back. The wind hit her helmet, cold and fresh, and her thoughts tangled. "Mom's going to be upset. I did promise to be on time. And who is that guy? Sketchy somehow." She recalled his gaze, calm, warm, but underneath its strength, the kind you sense instinctively, strong, very much so. Those guys bolted like strays before a wolf for a reason. A barely visible smile appeared on her lips, dangerous, almost predatory. The next morning Makochi greeted Umemiya with bright sunshine. He heard that one of the renovated spaces was opening a self-defense school for girls and women. In his hands he held a small flower pot with seedlings, a signature gift from Furin's head gardener. When Umemiya approached the building, he heard sharp, rhythmic sounds of strikes. Thud thud, thud thud. Only professionals hit like that. He opened the door and froze on the threshold. In the middle of the hall, hung with punching bags, his acquaintance from yesterday was training. Kimi was in sports shorts and a crop top, her hair pulled into a tight bun, boxing wraps on her hands. She was working through a series of kicks on the makiwara pads held by a man of enormous size with scars on his hands and a thick beard. 10 more times. "Kimi, sharper," he boomed. "Got it, Dad." She exhaled, delivering another powerful kick. Umemiya involuntarily held his breath. "Dad?" flashed through his mind. So that's where the composure and technique come from. Hajime decided not to interrupt the training and stayed in the shadow by the entrance, inadvertently overhearing their conversation when they took a short water break. "It's not my fault about yesterday's situation," said Kimi, wiping sweat with a towel. Her voice was just as calm as yesterday. The giant father sighed heavily and placed his enormous palm on her shoulder. You're a magnet for trouble, Kimi. That's exactly why I taught you to strike first. He laughed, remembering something of his own, and that smile made his face strangely resemble Kimi's. Umemiya stood leaning against the doorframe, and his smile grew wider and wider. School for boys? Could she be the sister of someone from Furin? He thought. That would explain a lot. Just as stubborn and strong. And the father Muay Thai. Now it makes sense. Umemiya stepped forward into the light. Nice stance, he said loudly. I hope you don't mind guests? I brought something for your new school. Kimi turned around, her eyes widened slightly when she recognized yesterday's would-be rescuer. Kimi's father, Master Takeo, accepted the flower pot with seedlings, but his gaze remained sharp as a katana blade. He looked at Hajime not as a neighborhood leader, but as yet another wolf circling around his daughter. While Master Takeo stepped away to set down the pot, Umemiya moved closer to Kimi. She was unwrapping her bandages. You're even more serious today than yesterday, he noted. The conversation flowed easily. She even smiled briefly a couple of times at his jokes. But Hajime felt it physically an invisible line she had drawn between them. She didn't let him get closer than etiquette allowed. In her every movement there was a slight tension, as if she were constantly waiting for a man to try something underhanded. My father doesn't like street guys, Kimi threw out, unwrapping her bandages. Especially if that guy's the kind people run from with their tails between their legs. Umemiya laughed quietly. I understand him. If I were the father of such a beauty, I wouldn't like guys either. We moved here a month ago, she answered, carefully folding the bandages. I've been here a bit longer, was staying with my aunt along with my cousin, and my parents only just moved here. Ah, Umemiya nodded. That's why I hadn't seen you. Good, she muttered. Master Takeo approached them. He wiped his hands with a towel and looked at his daughter, then at Umemiya long, attentively, with that parental scanning that can't be mistaken for anything else. So you're that guy, he said, the one the thugs ran from like from a fire. My daughter says you're a shady type. Hajime. Kimi nearly choked on air. Dad, I never said you did, he calmly interrupted. And I agree with her. You're shady. Umemiya wasn't offended. On the contrary, he smiled wider. Maybe, but I'm not dangerous to her. Like anyone in Bofurin, we protect this city and its people. We'll see about that, Takeo grumbled. Because I don't like it when guys I don't know hang around my daughter. And you, I don't know you. Now, Hajime. Takeo's voice turned hard as concrete. I still have a lot of work to do, and I don't keep extra people in the hall. Umemiya nodded. I understand. I won't get in the way. Kimi rolled her eyes. Dad, I'm actually going to be late for work. Kimi grabbed her backpack, kissed her father on the cheek and ran to the exit, throwing a brief bye to the Bofurin leader. Umemiya smiled after her, then politely bowed to Master Takeo. Have a good day, sensei. I said you were shady, the man reminded him. Umemiya walked out and saw Kimi run into the house next door. On the porch sat Kimi's mother, a beautiful woman reading a book and enjoying a hot drink. Umemiya smiled at her and waved, and she waved back. In the restaurant kitchen, old school rock was blaring. Kimi was mentally racing down American roads to Motorhead, while her hands were already passing out the next order. Furin students filled every table. Servers couldn't keep up. The kitchen was churning out dishes one after another. Under Highway to Hell, the work blazed even harder. Kimi carefully watched the burger patties, ribs, and sausages on the grill. By the 10th song, most orders were ready. She quickly wiped all the surfaces from the oil and was getting ready to have coffee. The working atmosphere of the kitchen vanished the moment a server fell to the floor, a small, thin girl. She had been shoved by a huge man. As luck would have it, the chef had just gone out for a smoke consistently every 30 minutes. Like clockwork. What the hell are you doing? Kimi picked up the frightened girl from the floor. She could barely stand, her legs shaking with fear. Where's my order? Squirt? The man barked. Kimi immediately understood. This won't end peacefully. He hadn't come for food, he'd come to take out his anger on the girls. Get out of the kitchen, you idiot! Kimi shouted so loudly the man actually flinched. She sharply shoved him toward the exit. The door swung both ways, light, unfixed. Perfect for throwing someone out. Leave the kitchen. If your order isn't ready yet, speak to the manager and sort it out with them, she said. You little. The man swung so sharply the air whistled. Kimi instantly jumped back behind the door and used it as a shield, pressing her shoulder into it. A dull sound rang out. Someone crashed into a table. Hey man, calm down. A voice came from the hall. How's she supposed to cook your food if you're waving your arms around in here? The aggressor's body rolled down the stairs. 2 sturdy guys came out to escort him to the exit. Kimi carefully peeked from behind the door like a cat that's made a mess and checks if the owner is angry. "Thank you," she said quietly. All the rescuers were in Bofurin uniforms and looked at her with varying degrees of interest. "Kimi?" Kaji called out in a worried voice from the other end of the hall. Seeing her, he immediately moved forward. For him, Kimi wasn't just a cousin even though she was 3 years older. She had always remained the closest person to him. "Are you okay? Did he hit you?" "No, I'm fine," Kimi answered, trying to look calm, even though her hands were still shaking. Kaji examined her carefully the way a brother looks when he doesn't believe "I'm fine." And just at that moment Umemiya appeared in the doorway. He froze when he saw Kimi beside Kaji, and his face took on the expression of a person who has just witnessed a plot twist in a series. "What's going on here?" he asked, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. Kaji, not noticing the tension, waved his hand. "Oh, Umemiya, this is my cousin." "Kimi, cousin?" Umemiya raised an eyebrow. "So you're the brother who's ashamed of his sister?" He said it absolutely calmly, without even blinking. "What? Where the hell did you get that?" "Well," Umemiya crossed his arms, calm as a python. "I accidentally overheard her complaining to her dad when I came to thank them for opening the self-defense school. By the way, you could have asked for help on such a noble cause." The tension between the guys tightened so much the air grew thick. Kimi sensed it. Any moment now and they'd start measuring egos. She sharply cut through the tension. "Bofurin kindergarten, stand down," she growled so that the hot blood in the boy's veins actually cooled a little. But her attention was instantly switched to something else. "You little." Kimi spotted the chef and launched herself at him with a towel. The chef just blinked, not understanding what he was being hit for, but he took it stoically. He knew Kimi was just letting off steam. "You're out smoking." Kimi was boiling, her eyes gleaming with anger. "While some random guy is harassing your staff," she jabbed a finger at the servers, "and you guys have lost your minds. The pass is backed up. Grab those plates and move. Get out of my sight." All 3 received a towel lashing and instantly scrambled to do their jobs. "Let's get out of here before she hits us too," Umemiya whispered, genuinely impressed. "She can." Kaji grabbed his elbow and they quickly retreated to the hall. Hajime didn't let Kaji return to his table. "So that's your sister? Tell me about her," he said and pulled the guy toward his table. The grip was so firm that Kaji simply had no choice. Starting to tell Umemiya about his sister, Kaji suddenly sank into memories that still hurt. 3 months ago Kimi arrived in Makochi barely alive. The hall where their father trained Thai boxers had burned down. The sensei had died, Kimi's close friend. She seemed to disappear inside herself. She didn't want anything, barely ate, didn't speak. Her only contact with the world was a therapist twice a week over video call. Takeo Yamada didn't back down. He knew his daughter had to go through this. But one day the ghost who hadn't left her room for weeks appeared in the hallway in biker jeans and a leather jacket. "Dad gave me money for gas. Let's go for a ride. And show me the city while we're at it." And Kaji went. He couldn't not go. Then Kimi found a job through the motorcycle. Mom had forbidden giving money for gas, so Kimi earned her financial freedom herself. She would bring home burgers made to her own recipe and they were the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. Umemiya listened in silence, at first just with curiosity. Then his gaze changed. It became more serious, deeper, even softer. He sat leaning on his elbows on the table and didn't interrupt a single word, even though he usually never missed a chance to chime in. They sat until the very closing while the staff cleared the tables and the music in the hall faded to a barely audible background. Kaji, the sly one, quickly figured it out. They were both headed the same way. He left with his sister, leaving Umemiya with the thoughts of what he'd heard. "You can't stay out of trouble?" Kaji quietly entered the house. The parents were already asleep. He looked at his sister with the anxiety he had long learned to hide under jokes and bravado. But today it was breaking through to the surface. Kimi sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, shoulders tense, fingers gripping the fabric of her pants, breathing uneven. "That guy," her voice broke, barely audible, almost childlike. Did he tell everything?" "Yes," Kaji answered softly, sitting down beside her. "That guy, he's the Bofurin leader. And he told me the circumstances under which you met." Kimi flinched, barely noticeably, but Kaji saw it. "Sorry," he whispered. "It won't happen again. I won't leave you alone. Not even for a few minutes." "Forget it," she whispered. "I would have handled it without that guy." "Kimi," his voice became warmer than ever. In the kitchen there was a soft yellow quiet. The lamp above the table cast warm light. On the table lay cardboard boxes, and the smell of food made Kaji's mouth water involuntarily. They sat across from each other and ate slowly, and every bite seemed incredibly delicious. Kimi raised her eyes and caught his gaze. "What?" she asked quietly. Kaji smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread in his chest. "Just glad you're here. That you're better. That I get to be the brother who protects his little sister." Kimi lowered her gaze, but a quiet, sincere smile appeared on her lips, the kind he hadn't seen in a very long time. "Thank you, Kaji," she whispered. "I need this too," he answered just as quietly. They continued eating in silence, in a warm, healing silence. The day off started with Mom's shopping list. Stopping to check off her purchases, Kimi sensed something was wrong. A group of guys stood near the store laughing, arguing, looking too normal for that to be reassuring. Kimi walked down the street, gripping the grocery bags so hard her fingers turned white. The air was fresh, but with every step it grew harder to breathe. Her chest tightened. The world around her seemed to be narrowing. Kimi took a step back and the world lurched sharply. The air turned thick as smoke. The bags slipped from her fingers. Her legs already weren't listening. She swayed, and at that very moment someone's hand managed to catch her by the elbow. "Careful." The voice was young, slightly frightened. A second guy caught her from the other side. Light hair, glasses, a notepad sticking out of a pocket. Nire Ahiko. He looked as if he had accidentally ended up at the center of an event he was completely unprepared for. "She's pale, very pale," Nire muttered, flipping through a page of his notepad. "No time for notes." Another guy grumbled and lifted Kimi in his arms. "Let's go to Pothos. It's closer." Kimi tried to say something, but the words fell apart in her head. Inside the Pothos cafe it smelled of coffee and warm bread. The light was soft, not as harsh as outside. "What happened?" Kotoha Tachibana ran out from behind the counter and quickly took in the situation. The guys stood confused and frightened. "Put her here." Kotoha crouched beside her and gently placed her hand on Kimi's shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me? It's okay. You're safe." Kimi blinked. Air rushed back into her lungs in a jolt. She inhaled, again, and again. "Maybe water? Or something sweet?" Nire spoke quickly, nervously, but sincerely. "I read that it helps with these kinds of conditions." Kotoha gave a brief nod and went for warm tea. Suo stood calm and kept the space stable. "I'm very uncomfortable in crowds right now, especially when it's a crowd of guys." The words broke from her lips as if she was afraid they'd be misunderstood. Her fingers trembled again. Kotoha nodded, not sympathetically, but with respect. "You don't owe it to anyone to feel okay in situations that scare you. You're in a safe place right now." Nire froze as if afraid to do something unnecessary, and lowered his gaze so as not to pressure her with his presence. "Suo, Nire." Sakura stepped back. Kotoha pulled the guys aside and returned to Kimi. "You don't have to explain anything. Just breathe." Kimi took a sip of tea. Warmth spread inside, and the world finally stopped swaying. "This is the first time," she whispered. "I suddenly got so scared I couldn't even move." She was gripping her phone as if it were the last thread keeping her in reality. "Mom, can you come, please?" The cafe door chimed. Umemiya Hajime walked in with white hair and a dark green coat, wide smile, scar above his eyebrow. He entered as if he had brought the sun with him. "Oh, Koto." He cut the phrase short the moment he saw Kimi. The smile vanished instantly. "What happened?" His voice, usually light and cheerful, now sounded serious, almost anxious. Kimi raised her gaze, trying to pull herself together. "It's already past." Umemiya moved closer slowly, carefully, so as not to frighten her. He shifted his gaze to Kotoha, to Nire, to the grocery bags on the floor. "She fainted on the street," Kotoha explained. "The guys brought her here." Umemiya nodded, but didn't take his eyes off Kimi. "You're safe," he said softly. "We're here." The door opened again. Kimi's mother stood on the threshold, agitated, out of breath, with frightened eyes. She immediately rushed to her daughter. "Kimi, sweetheart, I'm here. It's okay. It's okay." Kimi tried to get up but her legs gave out. She started to fall, and at that very moment strong hands caught her lightly, as if she weighed no more than air. Umemiya held her carefully but firmly, the way you hold someone you're afraid of hurting. "I'll help," he said quietly, without a shadow of doubt. Mom raised her eyes to him, first surprised, then filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Umemiya gently adjusted Kimi and turned to her mother. "Where should I carry her? To the car?" Kimi, half conscious, felt only one thing. For the first time in a long time, the people around her didn't want to break her, only to help. When she was settled into the car, her mother thanked them again and drove away. Umemiya returned the grocery bags and stepped out into the fresh air. The walk home was quiet, almost empty until Kaji emerged from the darkness. He stood under a streetlight, as if cut out of shadow, face tense, gaze cold. "We need to talk," he said without greeting. Umemiya stopped. Kaji moved closer, and the light fell on his hands. The knuckles were split, the skin scraped, as if he had been hitting not a person, but a concrete wall. "Last night I caught someone. He was photographing Kimi's window. He doesn't know anything," Kaji continued in an even but hollow voice. "Though I had a good talk with him, but I took his phone and arranged a meeting with the person he was sending the photos to." Umemiya clenched his jaw. His gaze darkened. "When?" Umemiya asked quietly. Kaji raised his eyes. In them there was no fear, only cold determination. "Tonight, midnight, the old warehouse by the river." Umemiya slowly nodded. The tension between them became almost tangible, like an electric current. "Good. We'll go together." The old warehouse by the Makochi River had long since stopped being used for its purpose. Once it stored fishing gear and spare parts for boats, but now its wooden beams were rotting from the inside. The roof held on by sheer will, and the air smelled of rust, mold, and stale secrets. Umemiya and Kaji walked in silence. Along the river the fog lay low, damp, contemplative wisps. The water below reflected the broken lights of the opposite bank. How many of them could there be? Umemiya finally broke the silence. "I don't know," Kaji replied. "That guy didn't say. Or rather, couldn't. You handled him alone?" "Yeah. Good work." Kaji didn't answer. He looked ahead, and in his gaze there was nothing of that boyish lightness that usually lived in the corners of his eyes. Right now he was simply a person who was very afraid for someone important. "Does she get them often? Panic attacks?" "Less than 3 months ago," Kaji said at last. "Back then it happened almost every day. Now less. But I still can't sleep normally. Every time she goes out alone, I think, what if? What happened there?" Umemiya spoke evenly, without unnecessary pressure. "With the fire and the person who died." Kaji was silent for a long time. The river stirred to the left, dark and indifferent. "That sensei, Kawasaki Jin. He had trained under Dad since childhood. Kimi had known him for as long as she could remember herself. He taught her her first strikes before Dad did. Taught her that strength isn't for attacking. Taught her that protecting is not the same as hitting." That night there were children in the hall. The younger group. Kimi had come to help with the training just because she wanted to. When it ignited, she got everyone out. Every single one. But Kawasaki stayed inside, said he'd check if anyone was still in the changing room. He didn't come out. Kimi tried to go back. Kaji continued more quietly. "They held her back. By force." She screamed, struggled, but 2 grown men were holding her and she couldn't do anything. She just stood and watched the hall burn. Watched everything she'd known since childhood burn. Kimi blames herself, even though no one else blames her. But she's always like that if she couldn't do it. She didn't try hard enough. Umemiya walked in silence for a few more steps, then said, "She's strong." "Yes," Kaji replied. "That's why it's scary. Strong people go unnoticed when they're struggling. People think, she's fine, she'll manage, but she simply doesn't know how to show that she won't manage." Ahead through the fog the silhouette of the warehouse appeared. Umemiya stopped. He raised his hand. Kaji also froze. They listened. Inside, several lanterns were burning cold, bluish light. Voices. "At least 4. I go in first," Umemiya said quietly. "This is my sister." Kaji answered just as quietly. Together, inside stood 4 people. One sitting at a table with a laptop was thin, pale, in a hoodie, looking like a student dragged out of a dorm in the middle of the night. The other 3 looked more reliable, broad shoulders, tight fists, the eyes of people who know how to hit. The one standing closest opened his mouth and closed it. Something triggered in his memory. You're the Bofurin leader," he managed. "Good job," Umemiya answered calmly. "Good memory. Then you probably already have a sense of what's going to happen here in the next few minutes. Where are the images?" The one with the laptop lunged sideways, but Kaji was already there. He placed his palm on the laptop lid and quietly, but firmly, closed it. "Sit," Kaji said. 2 of the 3 guards charged at once, and that was their mistake. Umemiya moved between them as if they were trees in a forest. The first got an elbow to the jaw, the second a knee to the side, and both ended up on the floor before they even understood what had happened. The third stopped. Umemiya looked at him. Just looked. He raised his hands. "I'm not involved. I was hired to guard." I didn't even know what the photos were. Understood. Umemiya nodded. Then stand still and don't move. Name. Matsumoto. The man whispered. Matsumoto K. Who hired you? Silence. Umemiya placed his hands on the table and leaned in so that only about 20 centimeters remained between them. Matsumoto K. I ask once. Politely. The second time less politely. Toda. Matsumoto forced out. Toda Ryusei. He said it was for personal use. I thought he was just a psycho stalker, but he wanted to show the photos to her father. Said it was for her own good. I saw his eyes when he said it. He wanted to break her, through someone else's hands. Umemiya straightened up. Something in him became absolutely still, not cold, but still, like before, a serious decision. Where is he now? I don't know. He was supposed to come here at 1, to pick up the material. Umemiya looked at Kaji. We wait. Toda Ryusei arrived at 1:20. He entered confidently, a man accustomed to feeling like the master of the situation. Medium height, neat, expensive watch. A face with well-formed features that often hide very wrong people. He saw Umemiya and stopped. Then he saw Kaji. Then his men on the floor. Do you know who I am? He asked. Voice level, even arrogant. Toda Ryusei. Umemiya answered. Father on the city council. Mother heads a charity foundation. Older brother in the police. And you thought that would protect you. You can't do anything to me. If you touch me, my brother will. Your brother, Umemiya cut in, will learn what you were doing with photos of a young woman. Anonymously. With enough details that even the family's goodwill won't be able to sweep it under the rug. That's blackmail. No. Umemiya shook his head. Blackmail is when you ask for something in return. I'm not asking for anything. I'm simply saying, if you appear in this neighborhood again, I won't stay quiet. And I have people who know how to speak very persuasively. Toda looked at Umemiya for a long time. Tried to find a weak spot. Didn't find one. Get out of my way, he said at last. But there was no longer that confidence in his voice. With pleasure. Umemiya answered and stepped aside. The door is over there. Toda left. Didn't look back. But something appeared in his walk that hadn't been there when he entered. Tension between his shoulder blades. The tension of a man who knows he's being watched. When the door closed, Kaji slowly exhaled. Is that enough? No, said Umemiya. But it'll do for today. Kimi woke up late. The sun was already quite high, and the room was warm, the quiet, lazy warmth of a Saturday morning that demands nothing from you. She lay staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what she felt. Yesterday everything had fallen apart right on the street, among people, in daylight. She, who never showed weakness even when she had every right to, had collapsed in a stranger's cafe. There was no shame. That surprised her. Instead of shame, something quiet and almost like relief. She remembered the hands that had caught her, confident but careful. That voice, you're safe. Without extra words, without excessive pity. Umemiya. Kimi closed her eyes and opened them again. No, come on, she said to herself out loud. But the quiet something in her chest gave no answer. From below came the smell of coffee and the sound of Mom's voice. She was talking to someone on the phone. Dad was probably already in the hall. Kimi got up, washed her face, pulled her hair into a careless bun and came down to the kitchen. Mom slid a cup of coffee toward her and returned to her conversation. Outside the window, Makochi was starting its day. Somewhere a motorcycle rumbled. Far away a bicycle bell rang, and someone laughed so loudly that even through the glass the warmth in that sound was audible. Nothing terrible happened, she told herself. You fell. You were picked up. You got up. Mom finished her conversation and put down the phone. Do you want to eat? Later. Okay. Pause. Yesterday that guy? Umemiya, he brought your bags. Everything's in the fridge. Kimi didn't raise her gaze from her cup. Understood. Takeo Yamada trained alone. He struck the bag methodically, rhythmically, not with anger, but with that focus that comes after 20+ years of training. Every strike in its place. Every exhale precise. Takeo was thinking about yesterday. Thinking about Umemiya Hajime. He'd made inquiries quietly, without fuss. Umemiya Hajime, 21 years old, leader of Bofurin. Bofurin isn't a gang in the classic sense. They protect the weak. Don't deal in anything illegal. At the police the file is thinner than any real criminals. But still a thug. Such guys bring danger with them the way a dog brings mud in from the street. Not with malicious intent. Just how the world works. Takeo remembered Umemiya's eyes when he looked at Kimi in the cafe. He had seen such looks before. He himself had once looked that way. That was exactly why he didn't like it. The hall doors opened. Dad, said Kimi. Have you been here long? Since 6. She came over, placed a glass of water beside him that he hadn't asked for, and sat on the bench. She was silent the way a person is silent when they're thinking something over. Takeo stopped, took the water, drank half. "How are you?" he asked, simply, without excess. "Better," Kimi answered, a little embarrassed. "About what?" "About yesterday." That it was in front of everyone. Takeo sat beside her, a large man with scars on his hands, and in him right now there was nothing of the trainer, only a father. "You got the children out of the fire. All of them. By yourself. When your own heart was screaming." Pause. A panic attack in a cafe is not shame. It's just the cost that you pay for still standing. Kimi stared at the floor. She clasped her fingers together. "I know. I just wanted to stop." "It will stop," Takeo replied. "Not immediately, but it will stop." He placed his palm on her shoulder. "Heavy, warm, reliable. And one more thing. That guy, Umemiya. What about him?" she asked evenly. "Nothing," said Takeo. "For now. But I'm watching." "Dad." In her voice there was something between exhaustion and warm irritation. "He just helped." "I know." Takeo stood and picked up his gloves. "But guys like that always just help. At first. Maybe some of them just help," she said. Takeo stopped, didn't turn around, but in his shoulders there flashed a microscopic uncertainty. Makochi lived its rhythm. The self-defense school opened officially, and on the very first day more students showed up than Takeo had expected. Mostly young women, a few teenagers, one woman in her mid-40s with the expression of someone who had long meant to do this but kept putting it off. Kimi ran the children's group Saturday. 3 hours. Kids from 7 to 12, mostly girls, a few boys. She treated them sternly and caringly at the same time, the way Dad had taught her. Umemiya didn't show up at the hall, but Kimi noticed him in other places by coincidence. Once at the store where she was buying coffee, he was standing by a shelf reading the ingredients of some sauce with such a focused look, as if it were important documentation. She walked past. He looked up, nodded. She nodded back. Nothing more. Another time at the market, he was walking in the opposite direction with some tall guy, laughing about something. He saw her, waved. She pretended not to notice, but then caught herself looking after him. Fool, she told herself. The third encounter was less accidental. Kimi was coming back from work late. The night was quiet, and she rode slowly, enjoying the silence. The streets of Makochi at night had a different character, not threatening, but contemplative, as if the city finally allowed itself not to rush. She stopped by her family's house, killed the engine, and saw Umemiya. He was sitting on the steps of the neighboring building with some paper in his hands. A streetlight burned yellow above him. He wasn't looking her way. "You're sitting out late," she said. Before deciding whether it was worth speaking at all, he raised his head, smiled warmly, without feigned surprise. "You're also coming home late." "I was working." "Me too. Just a different kind of work." "What's the paper?" "A complaint from residents about noise from one of the blocks. Trying to figure out who's there and what's going on." "And you're doing this, sitting on someone else's steps at midnight?" "I think better in fresh air." "Why do you do this?" she asked, not defiantly, sincerely. "What exactly?" "Protect the city. All these people. You could live more quietly. Do something safer. But you walk around at midnight, collect complaints, drive dangerous types away from strangers in alleys." "Someone has to," he said at last. "And if I can, why not?" "That's not an answer." "No? It's a half-truth." He was quiet for a moment. Then somewhat unexpectedly he smiled differently. Not that wide smile. Quieter. More real. "When I was little," he said, "there was an older guy in our neighborhood. Just big, calm, reliable. When things got dangerous on the street he'd come out. Without words, without theatrics. He'd just come out and stand there. One day he didn't come out, because there was no one left to come out for him." Umemiya lowered his gaze to the paper. "I decided. If there's someone who can come out, let it be me. While I can." "Is that a better answer?" she asked. "A little better." She put on her helmet, started the engine, but before driving away, she looked back. "Those steps are cold. You'll catch a cold." "I'll go in soon," he replied. "Okay." And she left. And Umemiya sat for a long time, looking at the empty street, and in his chest something hummed warmly that had nothing to do with residents' complaints or the night air. Self-defense school. Children's group. Kimi stood before 8 small people who looked at her with that particular children's attention, full and merciless. "Today we learn one rule. If someone tries to grab you, scream loudly." A 7-year-old girl with 2 braids raised her hand. "What if there's no one nearby?" Then scream at the top of your lungs. Because someone might be where you can't see. What if no one's there either? Then scream to scare the person trying to grab you. Most of them are cowards. Kimi didn't notice the hall doors open for a few minutes. Someone stopped in the doorway and looked, then quietly closed them and left. Takeo, who was watching from the corner, saw it, said nothing, but in his gaze there flashed for a moment that same cautious curiosity. After class, Kimi was washing her hands in the changing room when she saw Mia, a girl of about 11 who had stood apart from the others all lesson and done everything correctly, but mechanically, like a person who already knows why they're learning this. Were you scared too, the first time? Yes, Kimi answered honestly. And what did you do? I fought. The way Dad taught me. And if you don't know how to fight, then you scream. You run. You find an adult. But you came here to learn. And you will learn. My mom says to just not go to dangerous places. Kimi exhaled. Your mom loves you. But any place can become dangerous. That's why it's better to know how to protect yourself and then decide for yourself where to go. Mia nodded. Something in her eyes became a little brighter. From behind the hall doors someone snapped the bag sharply, powerfully. Kimi came out. Umemiya Hajime was hitting the bag. Without gloves, just hands wrapped in bandages. Clean series. Every strike measured. He wasn't performing or showing off, just hitting. For himself. When did you come in? During your lesson, he answered, not stopping. Watched a bit. You work well with kids. You were eavesdropping. I was observing. There's a difference. There's a self-defense hall here. For ladies. So says the sign. He nodded. But the sign says nothing about men being forbidden. I clarified with your dad. He said it's fine. As long as I pay for a membership and don't interfere. And you paid? Full membership. 3 months up front. Kimi looked away. But in the corner of her mouth a microscopic change. The stance is wrong, she said at last. Which? The elbow. You're holding your elbow too low during a straight punch. She moved closer. Boxing? A bit. Mostly street experience. It shows. Street experience teaches you to hit hard, but not correctly. Can you show me? No. I run the children's group. Not grown-up thugs. Shame, he said without offense. She had already turned to leave. But stop. Elbow at shoulder height. Not higher, not lower. During the strike the wrist rotates at the moment of contact. Not before. Got it. Kimi left. Umemiya struck the bag one more time. Correctly. Takeo Yamada was eating dinner late as always when the day had been heavy. Not physically, mentally. At the table sat his wife Akira, telling him something about the neighbors and a new shop that had opened on the corner. Takeo answered in the right places, but thought about something else. You saw him today, Akira said, without raising her voice. Who? Umemiya Hajime. How do you know? I saw from the window. And I saw your face when you came back from the hall. He paid for a membership. 3 months up front. That means he's serious about it. That doesn't make him better. No. But it shows respect. Takeo. She placed her hand on his. I know what you're thinking. That Kimi isn't ready yet. That she's only just beginning to become herself again. That any man beside her right now is a risk. But you're also thinking about something else. That guy has been there beside her exactly when needed. 3 times. That he's not trying to pressure her. That he paid for a membership and asked your permission. Takeo. You paid for a membership at the boxing gym where my mother trained. And then asked permission to bring her coffee after training. That's a different situation. Of course. She gently squeezed his hand. But you know what you looked like to her parents back then. And you know what saved you. What? That you respected their daughter. Genuinely. Not words, behavior. I don't trust him, he said at last. I know, Akira replied. But you didn't trust me at first either. You thought I was too good for you and sooner or later I'd realize it and leave. You are too good for me. Yes. But I stayed. I just don't want anyone to hurt her again. I know, Akira said. But you can't protect her from everyone. You can only teach her to protect herself. And you've already done that. I'll still keep watching. Of course. You're a dad. Just watch honestly. Not only for the bad. Rain came suddenly as always in Makochi. Kimi stood under the cafe awning and watched the street. The motorcycle stood nearby, covered with a tarp. Coffee or tea? She turned around. Katoha was standing in the doorway with 2 cups. Coffee. Umemiya was asking about you, Katoha said, matter-of-factly, as if in passing. When? The day before yesterday. Came in for coffee. Asked how you were doing. I said you were fine. He said, good, and left. That's all? That's all. But I know people. He asked the way a person asks when the answer matters to them. He took a membership at the hall. Kimi said, I know. My acquaintance from Bofurin told me. Everyone knows. Because Umemiya Hajime voluntarily paying for self-defense lessons, that was news that spread quickly. You're afraid, Katoha said gently. I'm not afraid. Kimi, maybe a little, she admitted. That's normal. Not for me. Even for you. Being strong doesn't mean not being afraid of anything. It means doing what needs to be done even when you're afraid. He appealed to me from that night. In the alley, she said at last, quietly, as if tasting the words. He approached calmly. Not to rescue me, just to be there. Yes, Katoha nodded. But then there were months when I didn't need any man nearby. And now I don't know, Kimi said. I don't know if it's that I'm already better, or if he's just different somehow. Maybe both, Katoha suggested. The rain grew quieter, almost stopped. He's from the thugs. Dad will never accept it. Dad already allowed him in the hall. That's not the same. No, but it's a start. Kimi stood up, took her helmet, drove away, and almost immediately saw Umemiya at an intersection, with a bag in his hands. He saw her, stopped. She stopped too. For a few seconds they just looked at each other, he on the pavement, she on the motorcycle. He lifted the bag. Burgers. From that restaurant where you don't work these days. Pretenders, she said. Mine are better. I know. That's why I'm asking. Maybe next time you'll make some? For the guys. They've already heard the legends. Kimi looked at him for one more second. Maybe. And she drove away. Umemiya watched her go. The smile remained warm, slow, like morning sun that isn't in a hurry. Maybe, he repeated quietly. That's already not, no need. The quiet in Makochi that had lasted almost 3 weeks ended on a Friday evening. Kaji walked into the hall while Kimi was still cleaning up after class. His face said enough. She immediately put down the mop. What, Toda, he said. He hasn't calmed down. He's started circling around Dad, asking about the school, who's enrolled, who comes. Not a father, not a relative. Kaji spoke evenly, but his eyes held tension. He's looking for another leverage, against the school. If he finds something, he might try to shut it down, or damage the reputation. He's taking revenge on me for cutting him off. On us, Kaji corrected. But you're the main target. He thinks it's easier to hit Dad through you. He's misjudged Dad, Kimi said quietly. Does Umemiya know? She finally asked. I wanted to tell you first. Tell him. She raised her eyes, in them was no request. A decision. If Toda wants to play legal games, Bofurin knows this city better than any law firm. But I want to be kept informed of every step. This is my school, my dad, and I decide what happens next. Kaji looked at her. In his eyes was something warm and a little sad, the expression of a person who sees someone close growing stronger, and is glad of it, even when that means they need you a little less. Umemiya got a message from Kaji at 9 in the evening. Read it twice. Put his phone down. Toda Ryusei. He knew this type of person. They don't attack head on, they look for systemic weak points. Reputation, documents, connections. They wage war not with fists, but with papers and rumors. Umemiya made a call. Hiromitsu. I need information on Toda Ryusei. Everything there is. Pause. Yes, now. Another pause. Thank you. He went outside. Somewhere in the city, Kimi was probably already riding home. He thought about her, not as about a problem, as about a person. Umemiya showed up at the hall not during training time. Takeo opened the door and made a face that was hard to call welcoming. Training doesn't start for another hour. I know, Umemiya said. I came to speak with you. If you'll allow it. Takeo looked at him for a few seconds, then stepped aside. They sat in a small room behind the hall. Takeo placed water on the table, not coffee, not tea, water, which had its own language. Talk. Toda Ryusei, Umemiya said. You know that name? Takeo didn't change expression, but something in him became more collected. How do you know? Kaji told Kimi. Kimi told Kaji to tell me. Umemiya passed a sheet. Toda is planning to strike at the school through official channels. He's used this tactic 3 times already. He finds documentary gaps, files complaints through third parties, and while they're being reviewed creates reputational noise. Do you have all the licenses? Yes. Insurance? Fire safety? Sanitation? Everything's in order. I'm not opening halls for the first time. Then he'll look for something else. Reputational. He'll find someone among dissatisfied students or parents, offer money for bad reviews, or fabricate an incident. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to be warned. And that's all? Umemiya met his gaze directly. Also because your daughter told me this is her school and her dad. And she wanted you to know. But she wouldn't have said it herself because she knows how you react. Is she right? Umemiya asked. That you'd want to go sort it out yourself? Possibly. She doesn't want you to risk yourself. Umemiya spoke evenly, without excess. That's why I'm here. I know Makochi. I know how to stop this kind of pressure without leaving the legal framework. You want to help, Takeo said at last. But not for free. For free. Then why? Umemiya paused. Because it's right. A school where girls learn to protect themselves, that's right. Your daughter leading children, that's right. And some guy trying to destroy that, that's wrong. You're a shady type, Hajime, he said. But now in that voice there was none of the tone that had sounded at the beginning. Now it sounded almost like, I'm doubting my own verdict. You've said that. I have. But shady people I see right through. You I don't. Is that bad? Not yet sure. Do what you think is necessary. But if your actions harm my daughter or my school, I will not be polite with you. Understood. And one more thing. Takeo stopped by the door. She's starting to recover. For the first time in 3 months I see that she's genuinely here. Not hiding. Genuinely here. Don't ruin it. I'm not going to, Umemiya said quietly. Takeo nodded and walked out into the hall. Umemiya sat alone for another minute. The room smelled of wood, old leather from boxing gloves, and something resembling the training halls of his childhood. That same evening Kimi was returning from the market. On the porch sat Dad, smoking. He did this rarely, only when he was thinking something over seriously. She stopped. You're smoking. Second time this year. What happened? Takeo put out the cigarette, looked at her with that particular fatherly gaze. Hajime came. He said, I know. You asked him to. I asked Kaji to pass along information. He decided himself how to act. Kimi. Dad. They looked at each other. This wolf game of silence, they had played it for as long as Kimi could remember herself. He appeals to you, Takeo said. Not a question. Kimi set her bag on the step, sat down beside Dad. Maybe, she said. The same word, but in a different voice. Takeo was silent for a long time. He came to talk about the school, not about you. I expected him to start courting, to play up to me, but he only talked about the matter, concretely and honestly. That's how he is. You know him well already? A little, she answered. I still think he's shady. I know. But, he raised his hand, the gesture of a person formulating a complicated thought. He respects you. You can see it in the way he talks. He doesn't say, she, when he talks about you. He says, Kimi, like a name that matters. Dad, she said quietly. You don't have to rush anywhere, and neither do I. We'll just see how it goes. Takeo nodded. Slowly. We'll see. But I'm still watching. I know. And he knows too. Go eat. Mom made that hot dish you like. Takeo got up, walked past her. Kimi. He stopped. You're doing well. Not hiding. Being here. Kimi swallowed something hard in her throat. You taught me that. And they went inside. Makochi lived its rhythm and Umemiya had learned to fit into it without getting in the way. He showed up at the hall 3 times a week, paid his membership, hit the bag, stayed quiet when quiet was needed. Takeo looked at him the way an owner looks at a cat that's been living in the yard for a second month. Doesn't drive it away, but doesn't consider it his own either. One Tuesday, when there was no one in the hall, Kimi came earlier than usual. She wasn't expecting to see anyone, but Umemiya was already standing by the bag, unwrapping his bandages. You're here again. I have a membership. 3 months. They run out in a week. I'll renew it. She looked at him. He looked back calmly, without excess. The way a person looks who has already made a decision and isn't going to explain it. Why? She asked. I like it here. We have a self-defense hall. For ladies. The sign doesn't prohibit it. They trained in silence, each their own thing, in different corners of the hall. But the silence was already different from the beginning. Not tense. Just quiet. 20 minutes in, Kimi said without turning. The elbow is still a little low. I know. And you still don't fix it. Habit. Bad one. Yes. She finally turned around, walked over, raised his elbow to the right height with 2 fingers quickly, precisely, without excess. Like that. Remember. She was already walking away when he said, thank you. Not for the elbow. They both knew that. Kimi didn't stop. But for a moment her step became a little slower. Takeo woke at 5. As always. He went to the hall, turned on one lamp and began his warm-up. In the quiet he thought best. He was thinking about Umemiya. The guy had been coming 3 times a week, for a month now. Never late, never left a mess, never tried to talk to Kimi more than she herself allowed. He also thought about how that guy looked at Kimi when he thought no one was watching. Not predatorily, not calculating, simply the way a person looks at something that matters to them. Takeo remembered his own such gaze. Long ago. That was exactly what irritated him most. He made a decision. Umemiya came on Tuesday at 7 in the morning. Takeo stood in the middle of the hall with gloves in his hands. You're early. I'm always early, Takeo answered. You're also early today. Wanted to train before opening. Good. Takeo threw him the gloves. Let's train together. Umemiya caught the gloves. Looked at Takeo attentively, calmly. Understood. This wasn't an invitation. It was a test. Good, he said. They faced each other. Takeo was about 25 years older, but in him there was nothing of a person who feels that age in his movements. First series light. Takeo was testing. Umemiya responded, didn't try to attack first, just maintained his guard and moved. He knew. You can't rush here. Takeo pressed harder. Umemiya shifted sideways, not back. Sideways. The way Kimi had told him, and Takeo paused for a fraction of a second. Who taught you to shift? He asked, without leaving his stance. Kimi. Umemiya answered just as evenly. Takeo said nothing, but attacked again, this time without holding back. Umemiya held on. Not perfectly, with mistakes, but he held on. And crucially, he wasn't trying to win, just not giving up. After 10 minutes Takeo stopped. He removed his gloves. Umemiya also stopped, breathing uneven, a bruise forming on his cheek, but his gaze steady. You take a hit well. I know. And you weren't trying to beat me. I know I couldn't. Takeo narrowed his eyes. Yet, Takeo repeated. Something in his face changed. Didn't warm but became less closed. Sit. They sat on the bench. Takeo was silent for a long time. Umemiya didn't rush. You know what happened to her, Takeo said at last. Not a question. I know what Kaji told me. She doesn't tell it herself. I know. And you're still here. Yes. What do you want? He asked at last. Simply. Without wrappers. Umemiya didn't look away. I want to be nearby. Not to protect her, she doesn't need protection. Not to decide for her, she decides better than most. Just to be nearby. If she allows it. And if she doesn't, then I'll keep paying the membership and hitting the bag. Long silence. Takeo stood up, picked up his gloves. Tomorrow at 6, he said. If you want another spar, I'll show you where your gaps still are. He went to the back room. Umemiya still sat. It wasn't, yes, but it was no longer, no. She found out from Akira. Mom placed a cup of tea in front of her and said matter-of-factly, your dad is training Umemiya in the mornings. Kimi raised her eyes. What, Tuesday and Thursday? At 6. Already 2 weeks. Dad suggested it himself? Yes. He didn't say anything to me. He didn't say anything to me either. Takeo. She placed her hand on his. I think good ideas rarely look good at the beginning. They look scary and uncomfortable. And you keep wanting to find a reason to say no. And then time passes, and you realize the best decision of your life you almost missed, because you were looking for reasons. Kimi took her jacket and went out, sat on the motorcycle, sat for a long time without starting it, just looked at the street. 2 weeks. Dad is training him for 2 weeks and says nothing. Dad, who doesn't tolerate anyone near his daughter. Something in this silence was more eloquent than any words. She started the engine and drove. Nowhere specific, just around the city. Makochi in the morning smelled of coffee and fresh bread, and in that smell there was something like permission. You're no longer closed off. She rode and tried to understand if she was scared. It turned out a little, but not the way it used to be. At 6 in the morning Umemiya came to the hall and saw Kimi. She was sitting on the bench in the corner with a glass of coffee and looking at him as if she had come to see something specific and was no longer going to pretend she wasn't there. You're early. I live nearby. I don't need to go anywhere. You came to watch. Yes. He went in, greeted Takeo. Takeo looked at his daughter, then at Umemiya, then at his daughter again, said nothing, just threw Umemiya the gloves and took his position. Kimi drank her coffee and watched. They trained hard, but she saw what she couldn't have seen from the outside before. Umemiya is learning, not just taking hits. He analyzes, adjusts, remembers. Each time he holds on a little longer, makes a little fewer of the same mistakes. Dad didn't praise him, but didn't stop either. After the spar, when Takeo went to the back room, Umemiya came over to the bench. So? He asked. The elbow has gotten better, she said. That's all? You get tired more slowly than a month ago. That's good too. Yes. Silence. But not uncomfortable, just quiet. Why do you come? She asked at last. Really, why? Because your dad is the best trainer I've ever seen. And because I want to be a person he respects. Pause. Not for him. For myself. And not for me? That too. But I'll tell you that later. When the time is right. Kimi lowered her gaze to her cup. In the corner of her mouth a barely noticeable change. Not a smile. But something before it. Okay, she said quietly. And that was already no longer, no need. It happened on a Wednesday after class. The women's group had dispersed. The hall was empty. And Kimi was cleaning the mats in that particular silence that comes after work, full and peaceful. Umemiya came out of the back room and stopped. Seeing her. Can I help? I'll manage. He picked up the other end of the mat anyway and lifted it. They folded everything in silence and quickly. Then she sat on the bench and stared at the floor for a long time. Umemiya sat beside her, not close, with space between them. He had already learned this distance. Kaji told you about Kawasaki Jin, she said at last. Yes, he told you correctly? I think so. I watched him enter the changing room. I called out to him. He turned around, waved as if to say, it's fine, I'll be right back. Her voice was even, too even. He didn't come out. I tried to go back. They held me. She raised her hands, looked at her own palms as if they still remembered. They told me. You couldn't have done anything. The therapist says the same. Dad, Mom, Kaji, but I'm trained. I know how to fight. I've known since I was 8. I should have found a way. Kimi, Umemiya said quietly. I know it's not logical. She interrupted. I know, but knowing and feeling are different things. Yes, he agreed, without objections, but, just. Yes, she looked at him. You're not going to tell me I'm wrong? You're not wrong in what you feel. You're wrong in the conclusion. But conclusions change over time. He taught me that protecting is not the same as hitting, she said at last. I thought I understood that, but then it turned out there are things you can't protect anyone from, even if you're very good at it. Yes, Umemiya said again, and nothing more. They sat in silence. Somewhere outside the window Makochi lived its daytime life. But here, in the hall, time seemed to slow down. Thank you, Kimi said at last. For what? For not saying unnecessary things. Umemiya smiled faintly, that quiet version of the smile she had already seen several times and each time tried not to notice. I'm learning. It didn't come from Toda. The news was brought by Katoha. She called Umemiya in the morning. There's a type here. He's been circling around Takeo's school for a week, asking about students specifically, by name. Not a father, not a relative. I don't know who he is, but I'm uneasy. Umemiya wrote down the description, thanked her, called Kaji. Check it out. Kaji checked in a day. Hida Sotero, 32 years old, former private investigator, now a free agent who takes any job if the pay is right. In his track record were cases that made your blood run cold. Who hired him? Still don't know, Kaji replied, but he's interested specifically in 3 names. 2 are students from the women's group. The third Kimi. Umemiya gripped the phone. Good. Find out who's paying. I'll deal with Hida. How? We'll talk, Umemiya said calmly. They met on Tuesday evening. Umemiya found Hida at a corner cafe. He sat with a newspaper, looking like a man in no hurry. Umemiya sat across from him. Umemiya Hajime, Hida said. I expected you to find me sooner. I wasn't in a hurry. First I wanted to know who hired you. Everyone has a price. Umemiya continued evenly. You take any job if the pay is right. That means you're not ideological. That's good. You can't make deals with ideological people. He placed an envelope on the table. There's twice what you were paid inside, for you to pack your things and walk past these people. Forever. And if I refuse, then I'll spend the time and find who hired you, and make it so you never get another job in this city. Because I know a lot of people. Hida. The first option is simpler for both of us. Hida was quiet for a minute, then took the envelope. You're a smart person for your age. I'm just protecting what matters to me. Good luck to you, Hajime. And he left. The envelope had cost Umemiya nearly a month's savings. But some things have their price. And this price was right. Kaji found the client within a week. He placed one photo on the table. Umemiya looked at it, raised his eyes. Seriously? Seriously. In the photo was Toda Ryusei. But not that one, not the confident man with the expensive watch. This one looked 10 years older, and in his eyes burned something Umemiya recognized. Not anger. Obsession. He knew Kawasaki Jin, Kaji said at last. They were competitors. Toda wanted to open his own school in the same district of Tokyo. Kawasaki stood in his way honestly, but effectively. Toda believes Kimi knows something about the fire. That she saw more than she told. He's afraid of Kimi. That's why he wants to either compromise her or intimidate her, so she stays silent. Umemiya stood up. His breathing became even, but in his eyes something Kaji rarely saw. Not anger, something colder. She needs to be told. She's already carrying so much. She needs to be told. It's hers, her right to decide. Will you tell her? I'll tell her. But first her father needs to know. Takeo listened in silence. Umemiya spoke evenly facts, suspicions, what was proven, what wasn't. When he finished, Takeo sat motionless for a long time, then stood up, went to the window. If he's responsible, he killed my friend, possibly, and he wants to intimidate my daughter. Yes. Will she speak? Does she know something? I don't know. I didn't ask. It's her decision whether to be asked or not. Takeo turned around, looked at Umemiya long, with that penetrating quality that had already several times tried to find weak spots in him. You said, her right to decide. Kaji passed it on. Yes. You speak the same way Kawasaki used to speak. That protecting means not deciding for a person. It means giving them the chance to decide for themselves. Umemiya was silent. He taught her. She taught you. That's strange. Yes. Takeo nodded. Tell her. I'll be nearby. But tell her yourself. They sat on the roof of the building where the Yamada family lived. Kimi had known this roof since childhood. This was where Dad sometimes came to think. Umemiya came when she was already sitting. Dad said you were up here. Dad sent you. Dad said where you were. I came myself. He came over and sat beside her. Umemiya told everything. Slowly, clearly, without softening. About Toda, about Hida, about the suspicion regarding the fire. Kimi listened in silence. Her face didn't change, but the hands with which she had wrapped her arms around her knees tightened. I saw him there, she said at last. That night. I didn't know who he was. Just a stranger in our hall. I thought he'd come to watch the training. That happened. I didn't even remember his face, only that he left 10 minutes before it ignited. Did you tell the investigators that? Back then I didn't connect it. Her voice grew quieter. I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about Jin. Will you connect it now? She was silent. For a long time. Then. Yes. One word. But in it was something Umemiya heard for the first time, the decision of a person who had long been carrying the burden of guilt and suddenly saw that this burden had another side. I'll help. With who to talk to, where to be. But you decide. I know. They sat in silence for a while longer. The wind picked up a little cold. Autumnal. Umemiya. What? Why are you doing all this? Hida. Toda. Now this. You're spending your time, your money, your peace of mind. Not exactly, he said. What do you mean, not exactly? Not for people in general. For you. And for your family because they're yours. That's honest, she said at last. I try. She finally turned and looked at him. He looked back without hurry, without expectation. Just looking. The way a person looks who is comfortable being nearby, even in silence, even in difficulty. You appeal to me, she said, quietly, without preamble. He didn't react outwardly, but in his eyes something grew warmer. I know, he said. Show off, she muttered. No, just me too. From that night in the alley, Kimi looked at him for one more second, then turned away, but didn't leave. Stayed sitting the same way, shoulder to shoulder, almost but not quite touching. Don't rush, she said at last, not as a warning, as a condition she was willing to accept. I've already learned. Takeo wasn't sleeping. He sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, thinking about Kawasaki, about the fact that if Toda was truly involved, this was justice. The kind of justice he had been waiting 3 months for and had almost stopped believing would come. He was thinking about Kimi up there on the roof, with this guy. Takeo exhaled. He was afraid. Had always been afraid ever since Kimi had first gone out alone into the street. Parental fear, the kind that never goes away. You just learn to live with it. He opened the roof door and stopped. They sat side by side and looked at the city. Between them space. But in the way they sat, there was something that made Takeo feel in his chest something warm and sharp at the same time. Kimi turned. Saw her father. Takeo stood for a second. Then nodded to both of them and quietly closed the door. He went back down to the kitchen. Reheated the tea. Sat down. Outside the window Makochi burned with lights, and in that burning there was something like an answer. He would still watch. He always would. But tonight he allowed himself to watch a little less and believe a little more. The Toda case got moving. Kimi gave her testimony. The investigation was reopened. She spoke to the police calmly, clearly, without breaking. Umemiya waited outside and thought, she's so strong. When she came out, he stood with 2 cups of coffee tasteless. Police cafeteria coffee. He held one out. She took it, drank, grimaced. Terrible, I know, but it's warm. They walked nowhere specific, just through the city. Autumn had truly arrived. Yellow leaves, cool and clean air. How are you? Fine, she thought. Really fine. Not, everything's okay fine. Actually fine. I can see that. Near a small square where several old trees held on to their last leaves. Kimi stopped. Umemiya. What? She stood and looked at the leaves, yellow, bright, the kind that makes it hard not to see something more. Back on the roof. I told you that you appeal to me. I remember. I'm not used to saying things like that. I know. But I said it. She finally turned to him. Because you're the first person in a very long time beside whom I don't have to pretend anything. Not that I'm strong. Not that I'm fine. You just are. And that's enough. Kimi, he said. What? He took a step forward. Not toward her, beside her, to stand the same way looking at the leaves. Shoulder to shoulder. I'm in love with you. Without theatrics. Without drama. Just as a fact that has long existed and which it is finally time to put into words. From that night in the alley, when you looked at me as if I were part of the scenery. From the moment you said, Kimi, and drove away. From every time you say, no need, and it means, maybe. Pause. I didn't rush. You yourself said don't rush. But today I want you to know. Silence. The leaves rustled, the wind lifted one, spun it, and let it go. Kimi was silent for a long time. He didn't hurry. I'm not ready yet, she said at last, quietly, honestly. I know, but, she stopped, exhaled. But I want to learn, to be ready. With you I want to learn. He turned and looked at her. In her eyes there was no fear. That fear that had lived there for months had become smaller. It hadn't disappeared, but had shrunk to a size you can live with. That's enough, he said. Really? Really? She looked at him for one more second, then did something he hadn't expected. She held out her hand. Just an open palm. Between them, he placed his on top. They stood like that, not embracing, not kissing, just standing side by side with joined hands under Makochi's autumn leaves. And in that simplicity there was so much that words would have been superfluous. Somewhere beyond the trees the city lived its rhythm, but it seemed to have slowed down a little, just enough for 2 people to understand. Something had begun. The next morning Takeo came to the hall at 6. Umemiya was already there. They greeted each other, took their gloves. But before starting, Takeo stopped. I heard from Akira about yesterday. And? Takeo was silent for a long time, then raised his eyes to him. For the first time in 3 months I see that she's genuinely here. Not hiding. Not playing that everything's fine. Genuinely here. He looked at Umemiya. She's strong, he said at last. But she knows how to break. From the inside. In a way that doesn't show on the outside. If you ever fail to notice when she's breaking, I will personally show you every gap in your defense. All at once. Understood? I'm still not saying, yes, Takeo continued. I'm saying I see you. And as long as what I see stays what I've seen so far, we have an understanding. Umemiya nodded. Takeo knocked his gloves together. We start. And today I won't be soft. You never have been. Takeo stopped. In the corners of his eyes something that under other circumstances might have become a smile. Right answer, he grumbled, and took his stance. Saturday morning. Kimi was running the children's group. Mia, the same girl with 2 braids, stood today not at the back but at the front. Wasn't hiding. Umemiya, watching from the doorway, noticed this immediately. He didn't go in. Just stood and watched as Kimi walked among the children. She corrects their stances, says something quietly to each one, and each one afterwards stands a little straighter, a little more confident. She was born for this, he thought, not just to fight, to teach. After class, when the children had gone, Kimi came over to him, hair in a tight bun, bandages still on her hands, a small bruise on her cheek from yesterday's spar with Dad. Were you eavesdropping? Observing? There's a difference. She rolled her eyes, but in her eyes warmth. Let's go, she said. Where? Mom made breakfast. She said to tell you you're invited. Umemiya raised an eyebrow. Mom said that? Mom said that. Dad's probably there too. Just don't expect him to spoon-feed you porridge. It's enough that he's not chasing me with a fork. That's progress. They walked out together. Makochi greeted them with autumn sun, warm, faintly golden. The leaves on the trees trembled in a light breeze. Kimi walked alongside, not touching, but alongside, exactly as she allowed herself to be. Close, but in her own space. Umemiya. What? You said you've been in love with me since that night in the alley. I said it. I thought about you too. Back then, she admitted. When I drove away, I thought. Strong. And calm. That's rare together. And nothing. I just wanted you to know. Umemiya smiled, that quiet smile that had already become recognizable to her. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's a fact, not a compliment. I know. That's why I'm thanking you. She finally turned and looked at him. The sun was behind her back, and in that light she looked the same as that night in the alley, but now he saw more. He saw the tiredness she was learning to let go of. He saw the strength that needs no confirmation. He saw the small bruise on her cheek and the decision in her eyes, the kind that is born not from the absence of fear, but from the choice to go forward despite it. Little by little, she said. Little by little, he agreed. They walked toward the house where Akira was already setting plates on the table, where Takeo sat with coffee and pretended to read a newspaper while actually waiting. Makochi outside the window burned with autumn morning alive, loud, its own. In the alley where it all began, it was quiet now. The streetlight was no longer flickering, someone had finally fixed it. It burned steadily and calmly, illuminating the empty street. But if streetlights could remember, this one would remember everything. The night with the fog, the girl who didn't need rescuing, the boy who stayed anyway, and how one moment, one name, one, Kimi, changed them both forever. Some stories begin with an explosion. This one began with a single word in the darkness, and continued little by little, honestly, for real.